Welcome, everybody. I'm Anthony Gonzalez, and I'm the Senior Program Coordinator with the Higher Education Center. And we want to welcome you all today to our webinar titled High Times and High Stakes, Understanding the Intersection of Sports Betting, Cannabis Use, and College Prevention Strategies, featuring Dr. Ty Lostutter. Before we get started with today's content, I do just have a couple of housekeeping slides I'd like to review with everybody. Here on the screen should look somewhat familiar as we are in the Zoom webinar format. We do welcome your questions at any time throughout the live session, but we do kindly ask that you utilize the Q&A feature. We do have the chat enabled, and please feel free to introduce yourself and share where you're joining us from, as well as any reflections and resources as it relates to the presented content. But again, we do kindly ask that you utilize the Q&A feature for any specific questions for our presenter. We do have live captioning enabled for today's session, and you can turn that on through your bottom dashboard. Please send me a message if you have any issues getting that set up, and I will try my best to walk you through that process. We also encourage everybody to learn more about becoming a member of the Higher Education Center. You can learn more about the different membership tiers and the benefits that go along with them by visiting our website at hecaod.osu.edu. We also have a few upcoming events that I'm excited to share with everybody. We'll be kicking off our Spring Learning Collaborative next week on March 26th from 2 to 3:30, and that session is titled Heck AOD Through the Years, Leadership Reflections on Shaping Collegiate AOD Prevention Efforts. Our next webinar will be taking place on April 16th and is titled Connecting the Dots, Working with Fraternities and Sororities, and is featuring our very own Logan Davis. And we have the 2025 national meeting, which was taking place October 20th through the 23rd. The call for proposals is open for that and will be closing on Friday. So we would love to see your session submissions. We do have an array of formats, both in person and virtual. And with that, it is my great pleasure to turn it over to our presenter today. Joining us today is Dr. Ty Lostutter, Associate Professor with the University of Washington School of Medicine's Department of Psychiatric and Behavioral Sciences. Thank you so much for joining us, and it's my pleasure turning it over to you at this time.
Great. Thank you, Anthony. Thank you, Logan. Thank you for everyone being here today. I am Ty Lostutter, an associate professor, and as you mentioned, I'm at the University of Washington at a place called the Center for the Study of Health and Risk Behaviors, which is a research center in the Department of Psychiatry and Behavioral Sciences. I am very pleased to present today some research data that my colleagues and I have started as a small pilot study, and you are getting a sneak peek because we're just working on a manuscript on this very topic. So I am very thrilled today. Let me just check in. Is everyone seeing everything and okay? And again, please put your questions and answers, and or you can unmute yourself and ask me a question if that's helpful as well.
Ty, you will need to reshare your slides, but
okay. Let me do that then. If I can get to the button. Now, are those looking correct?
Yep, full screen and looks good.
Okay, great. Thanks, Anthony. I will also just mention that March is actually Problem Gambling Awareness Month, so it is a timely topic to actually have this conversation. I'm also aware that it is March Madness, and so the timing is not lost on us for those of us who do prevention and intervention work to try to meet people where they're at. So of course, this is a organization that I am part of, and so this is just our particular information that's going out during this month for Problem Gambling Awareness Month, and we'll get back to this at the very end of my talk. I want to start by simply saying I work at the University of Washington in Washington State, and I want to acknowledge where I live and work actually is unceded land by the coastal Salish people, including the Duwamish, the Squamish, the Tulalip, and the Muckleshoot tribes. And within our state, there are 28 federally recognized tribes that we work with who are our friends and colleagues. So the University of Washington stands on those areas, and we really want to acknowledge the indigenous people who were here before us and who actually today still help us. They are a lot of the individuals who actually pick up the work on issues related to problem gambling. And so I appreciate recognizing their particular work. And I hope that you'll recognize where you're living and working might also have been influenced by indigenous people before you. That being said, our funding agencies are actually from the International Center for Responsible Gaming, and some of the research group that I work with have received research grants or scholarships from the Evergreen Council on Problem Gambling. Mostly those were our student researchers. And so I want to recognize that those individuals and organizations that have helped us put together today's presentation. I do want to acknowledge that everything that I am saying is basically mine and my research colleagues. We were not influenced by either our funding agencies or anything else that have been working with us. They simply gave us the money and the freedom to actually do our research. And I'll tell you a little more about what that is. I will quickly again identify that all of this research is being done, and there's a large research group behind me who's actually helped put together this work. And I'm going to highlight some of the individuals who are on our research team and what they've recently done with this particular project, which we call the health outcomes of betting on sports projects, or as every good project, research project needs to have, a really cool acronym. So we're Project Hobbs. That was the best we could come up with. My collaborators include Joseph Lamberth. Joey was an undergraduate with us. He's now our full-time research coordinator on this project. He was a former research study who's helped us with data collection and has done several presentations and edits to this project and several others. He is currently working on one manuscript that's under review and one manuscript that he's working on right now. The one that I will tell you about or talk a little bit about is Perceived Social Norms and its influence on heavier sports betting. My colleague Arvin Shargan is also an undergraduate who's graduating this year and is applying for med school. And Arvin had his first author paper, which again from this project, where he was looking at the relationship between sports betting and adverse mental health and well-being outcomes. Our graduate student, Frank Song, who just defended his dissertation yesterday, is a foremost expert on sports gambling in general, and speculative sport trading. So if you're ever interested in talking more about speculative sports trading and the relationships between that and problem gambling among college students, I hope that you will seek out Frank's work. And then finally, the PI of our project is Scott Grappensberger. Scott is the principal investigator. He's done all the data analysis. He also edits and reviews manuscripts. And his recent paper looks at the relationship between sports betting and alcohol. So I will say this is one of the most productive research groups I've worked with in a long time. And we are trying to put out as many research papers to let people aware of this very hot topic of sports gambling. I, of course, am a senior researcher. I'm an associate professor. I have done a lot of research on the etiology, prevention, and treatment of gambling and mental health. I think that's how they got my recognition. I came to hear at the higher enter a previous speaker who came and talked on gambling in general, and I started asking questions. And the next thing I know, be careful what you ask today. You may get asked to come and give a presentation, but I'm delighted to do so. I've also received numerous federal grants and state contracts on the area of gambling disorder prevention and treatment. What I am hoping we can do today in the next hour is identify key trends in sports betting and cannabis use among young adults and college students, and talk about the treatment and prevention that we might need to consider on our campuses, examining the recent research findings from the study that I'm about to present, and again, as I've mentioned, talk about the prevention and intervention approaches that college specialists might need to think about when addressing both of these issues. So let me just start us back for what I mean by gambling. So we normally mean by gambling wagering on something of value of an uncertain outcome. And some of those activities can be somewhat skill-based. I would say my colleagues or our participants who talk about poker will sometimes say they're very skilled at poker and therefore they're good at it. We see a similar trend for sports bettors. Sports bettors will tell you that they think that they have advanced knowledge of sports outcomes. They will scour the information and try to evaluate. And so sometimes, and I will even say the apps that people use will reframe sports betting as a skill-based phenomenon. But what still makes it gambling is there's still the unexpected or the uncertainty of that outcome or chance. And that chance is what makes this a gambling phenomenon. There are concerning trends specifically around sports betting. So I would say sports betting is the new hot thing that's coming around. So sports wagering has nearly spent about 100 or has received about $120 billion in the US alone, which is up around almost 28% since literally 2022. So a quickly expanding, lots of money being involved in sports betting. The sports betting revenues have continued to grow every year exponentially. What we know about young adults is that about a third of them say they have made some sort of sports bet in the last month, and about 19% say that they're now betting weekly. So this is an activity that young adults are actively engaged in. And the reason that we think this engagement has occurred is because it now occurs on their phones. So, like everything, if you can now put it into the palm of their hands, they're more likely to do it. And it is tied with things like social media, advertisements, and of course, it's centered around sporting events. And so you do see a lot of technology being infused in a way that changes the way I would say older generations like myself and others used to think about sports betting. So a lot of people will come to sports betting and think, all right, I'm going to bet on the outcome of this game. And I will wait till the end of the game to know the outcome and to see whether or not the bet I made won. There's now a lot of changes in that with technology. Now there are in-play sports bet or prop bets that you can make through while the game is actively occurring. So almost every time there's a stop and restart of anything. So will they make the free throw? Will they make a field goal? Will they get even yardage between this play to this play in football? All of those different things can now become an independent bet that you can do quickly on a phone. And that rapid recession of a session of being able to bet on your phone on each outcome can actually influence the amount people are betting and how quickly they are betting. Similarly, there are now activities, I'll just say, we recently had the Super Bowl, right? And there are even weird things that people bet on that are not related to the sports bowl that happens in people's phones. Will Taylor Swift wear red? Will she kiss her boyfriend? Those things are now showing up in sports betting apps and making prop bets and bets in play that again influence people's ability to make wagers or games that aren't even directly related to the outcome of sports betting, and yet that is now a part of sports betting behavior that we're seeing. So if you're someone who's downloaded a mobile app for sports betting, or if you're watching a game, you are more likely to see the top two are ads. You will see professional players talking about a particular app that you can actually use, or you will see ads being sponsored by those individuals. If you have downloaded an app, you might get a pop-up message as soon as the game is over about how you could still continue betting on other things or invite you to a different kind of sports betting that you are not currently sports betting on. So if you finished one game, they will prompt you to move to a different game to sports bet. So this is all happening in college students' hands. So I want you to consider that technology is a part of what's going on. The other thing is the increased availability. In this map of the US, what you are seeing is the availability of sports betting as it has changed. So in 2018, the Supreme Court overturned a ruling that basically said sports betting can occur, no longer will be regulated by the federal government. It will, again, be given back to the states. You can all decide how you want to allow sports betting. And what we have seen between 2018 and now February of 2025 is that there are 38 states that legalize some form of sports betting, including Washington, D.C. and Puerto Rico. And this level of sports betting you can see on this map. So those with the darker blue allow some form of mobile betting, some mobile betting with some restrictions. Physical sports betting is the light blue, and green will be active legislation is currently pending to think about sports betting. So this is a phenomenon that currently is at 38 states and has continued to exponentially grow. I'm going to quickly pivot and now talk about the other piece of this intersection that we're going to talk about today, which is cannabis use. So cannabis, as most of you might be familiar, is a substance which typically is called marijuana or lots of other names and refers to the dried leaves, flowers, stems, seeds of the cannabis plant. And it has lots of active ingredients, 125 different cannabinoids. And the one that most people know about or think about is the one that is the delta-9 tetrahydrocannabinol, which is THC. And what the industry has also learned is that they can manipulate the amount of THC in different products. And so what I have shown you around the edge of the screen is all the different ways that you can now consume. You could have it in hand cream. creams. You could have it in body lotion. You can have it in drinks. You can vape it. You can eat it. You can dab in it. So there are lots of different ways for the administration of cannabis to for people to participate in. Now, when we look at the large national epidemiological data, what we find is that college students are increasing their use of cannabis use. So among college students, 44% using cannabis use in the past year, based on the latest data that we have, which was 2020, that was up compared to 38% back in 2015. And if we look at individuals who are not in college but are of college age, that remains around about a 42% rate. At the same time, as I've mentioned, the cannabis industry has figured out ways to actually increase the availability of THC. So you will see how THC is now marketed in lots of these places where it is legalized to purchase cannabis products, and that we do know that there seems to be an association with higher increased levels of THC, having increased levels of psychological and physical health and very serious associations. And so much like we tell people, like, drinking more does not necessarily make you feel better. More THC is not making you feel much better, although that is the way the marketing of these products typically goes to anyone who uses them. All right, so I've now kind of defined the terms of sports betting and cannabis use. I'm going to talk about the intersection for our research study. Like I said, our project was called Project Hobbs. We screened young adults. They didn't necessarily have to be in college, but they are of college age, and I'll talk a little more about who came into our study. These were some of the ads that we placed. This was a longitudinal study. So people were enrolling in our study for a year-long commitment that they would be filling out surveys every 2 weeks for the full year. So there would be about 24 or 25 survey weeks that we would ask them to fill out. There was a baseline survey and a 15-month follow-up survey that we asked them to fill out. And this is the data that we were presenting. Throughout that year, we tried to recruit slowly. We tried to recruit both men and women. This is an ad that we were using we used all social marketing. So predominantly Instagram was our place that we were gathering people, but our ads could be shown in other kind of social media markets. We changed our ads. I'm going to show you different ads. This one was during the women's World Cup and finals that were currently being played. Again, as you will see from our collection of all of our data, they had to be someone who was already sports betting. They at least bet 3 times in the last month. When we asked them during our screen, we actually asked, when people advertised, we would basically have them give us their contact information. Our research team would call them and verify they were a real person, and we verified a number. We had over 1,400 people that were who completed the screen. Of that number, we went down to about 210 who actually identified in the study. Of those in our current sample, we have a mean age of 25. It, again, mostly skews male, 27 or 77%. About 60% were under the household mean income of 75,000, which is not that surprising for a young adult population. 65% identified as white. Of those who were in our study, 27% were at 4-year institutions, 2% were at community colleges, and about 14% were in graduate school programs. Our participants came, again, nationally across 35 states. And again, what we've done here is map out where the participants told us they were where they were currently residing. Some of those states you will see there is no active legal gambling. So we assume that they are either using mobile apps and gambling in such a way that either they're using a VPN to change their address to look like they are legal, or they're using an app that allows them to bet across the country because there's no limitations. So when we were doing a sports betting study, we wanted to be specific about what we meant by sports betting, because I will say sports betting has changed a lot from the olden days of the way I used to think about sports betting, because sports betting can mean many things to many different individuals. So this is how we defined it for just our study. Sports betting is activity by predicting sports results and placing our wagering on that outcome. In our research, we mean activities like betting on professional or college sports, boxing or MMA fights. We did include fantasy sports betting, and betting on outcomes of esports that you are not playing in. So there are these competitions. This is a thing, again, where people are playing a sporting event in a video game and people are watching it and they are betting on the outcome or the events that occur within the esports activity. So electronic sports playing. What we also told them that what we did not mean in this study was their own kind of behavior. So we do not mean such as outcomes on video games, their own pool playing, golf matches with their friends. That's not what we meant. And we also excluded horse racing, which is again a popular form of sports betting, but not normally with younger age samples between 18 and 29. And again, this was one of our generic ads that we were using on social media. Another similar ad that popped up that was kind of generic. This is how we define cannabis. And I will, if there's any cannabis researchers here, I will probably not appease you in a way that will make you very happy because we did not have a refined measure of cannabis use. And the reason for that is we wanted it simply, again, that was not the scope of what we were interested in our study, but we wanted to know if they were using substances. And again, it had to be a very brief survey. So they would do every 2 weeks a very brief survey that took less than 10 minutes to complete. So the way we define cannabis for this study was if you use any products or preparation that includes hemp, marijuana, hashish, or THC products that are as they're derived from hemp and are psychoactive. And we reminded them that they're, because some states, of course, it is still illegal. So we reminded them that their responses would be kept confidential. So we tried to, again, remind people that this is a confidential study and encourage them to give us accurate data so that we could actually look. Now, the last things I will define for you is the outcome measures of our study that we're interested in that I'm going to talk about. So we define things such, and I gave you the exact questions. So some of these we developed specifically for the study. So sports or betting frequency for us was in the past week, how many times did you make at least one sports bet? And they could, of course, range from 0 to 14 days, since that was every 2 weeks. The number of bets in the past 2 weeks on days that you made sports bet, how many unique bets did you make on average? And we calculated those bets by multiplying the frequency item by the quantity item per day. Then we asked about their amount wagered. Now we're asking you to think about the amount you wager on sports betting. How much did you risk? In other words, and this is always an issue about gambling, is how much money were they gambling with? Because in a gambling activity like a traditional slot machine or poker, they could be up or down throughout the night. So we wanted to be careful and just ask about how much were you risking at the time that you made this bet, and have you lost on us every single bet? And then we asked in the past 2 weeks, how much money did you wager or sports bet in total? So we had an open numeric response that they could say how much money in total they gambled with. Then the last two things are measures that we use to kind of predict some sort of problematic behavior. So one of the unique features about problem gambling is individuals who, what we define in the area as chasing their losses. If I've lost money, I am more likely to go back and try to win that money back by continuing to gamble. Thinking, again, this is a cognitive distortion, is if I'm down some, I bet I could win some back, and then I'll break even, or maybe I'll get ahead. So we asked questions about chasing loss. In this case, we asked in the past 2 weeks, how many times did you place a new sports bet in the attempt to chase prior losses or win back what you had lost? And then, like I said, my colleague, Scott Gappensberger, has been actually developing a measure that was originally based on just the generic form of what's called the Problem Gambling Severity Index. And he modified it to specifically replace gambling with sports betting so that we could get a better measure of just specifically sports betting. And there is a paper, which I cited down below, on the validation of this measure. But it's a highly reliable measure on sports betting to look at the consequences that individuals are having when they are placing bets. All right, I'm going to take a breath and see if anyone wants to unmute or ask a question so that is all of this clear. Okay, well then I'll proceed with what did we find. So let me first say we're going to probably look at this data a couple of different ways. We're going to look at this data from the full sample. So 210 people completed all of our 2 weekly surveys that we are analyzing their data. We did not find any irregularities in the data. We have a pretty clean sample of 210 individuals who sports bet on a regular basis here. Then we asked, there is a sample of people who just use cannabis. To be honest with you, it was a 50-50 split. So exactly 50% of the sports betting participants didn't report any cannabis use in the past year, and 50% did. I will first remind you that 50% is higher than the 44% when I go back to the national average, right? So this sample does seem to be slightly higher than their at least one-time use of cannabis of any kind in the past year. So we're going to keep making these comparisons between the full sample and the cannabis sample. But you can see the frequency. So the first set of scale is if you include all 210 people, you can see that it's a really low base rate phenomenon in some ways. If we then skew that and just look at the people who did talk about their cannabis use, what you see is their frequency, or the number of times they used cannabis over time. And you can see how that scale kind of slightly moves up and down over the course of the year. So now I'm going to look at cannabis and sports betting behavior simultaneous use. So what happens if people actually use cannabis and happen to sports bet at the same time? So in the full sample, that occurred around 30% of the time. 30% of the full sample actually said, I at least used cannabis and did some sort of sports betting at the same time. And if we look at the people who were, again, the cannabis users, that's actually 60%. So if you're a cannabis user, you are more likely to also then engage in sports betting. I don't have a slide on this, but we did actually look at which came first, sports betting or cannabis use. What we can tell from at least the preliminary data that we're looking at right now, it seems to be that cannabis smoke started first, or cannabis use started first, and then it led to sports betting, from the best that we can tell based on the questions that we asked about this particular issue. But of the participants who endorsed both cannabis use and sports betting, 71% of the survey periods had reported simultaneous use, which meant that people were more likely to sports bet if they had been smoking cannabis, with the mean average days about 4 days in the past for every 2-week survey that they filled out. What else did we learn? These are the outcomes. So these are, again, this is a look at using kind of interclass correlation coefficients and using generalized linear models to make these kind of predictions or explanations. So again, when we look at the full sample, there was not a lot of difference between these outcomes on the full sample in general. The results were not statistically significant. However, if we then collapse and just look at those who actually smoke or use cannabis products and sports gamble, then we get significant outcomes. So the significant outcomes, or for those who use cannabis and sports bet, in that case, those individuals who did, there seems to be an interaction effect in which those who smoked cannabis and sports bet actually increased the number of bets, the amount wagered. They argued or supported that they were chasing their losses. They had an increase of sports betting frequency, and their scores of sports betting consequences did increase on days in which they smoked. So this is the within versus between participants, right? So if we look within the individual, for those individuals who were smoking on those days, this is the effect that we had. They saw increases in all of these different outcomes. I put up another screen that I, of course, like to do, which is a mapping of every participant's. And this is, again, along the idea of looking at the prediction between sports betting frequency and cannabis use. And you will see that the trend, the green line, is the overall trend line that's been estimated from all of these individuals. And here's everyone's individual behavior that they reported to us. For the most part, you will see that as cannabis frequency use went up, so did their sports betting frequency. I will point out that there is one outlier of this. You can probably clearly see it. It's the one that goes completely down. We don't have an explanation. My thought as a psychologist is always like, well, maybe that is someone who's decided they're going to quit smoking cannabis, right? There are the individuals in the middle of your study who decide they're going to stop for some reason. That is my hypothesis, but I have no idea. It could just be an outlier for an outlier's sake. But nonetheless, we left it in so that people can see the overall trends of the fluctuations of when people use cannabis. Those who do increase their sports betting frequency. And then one last thing, because again, we're looking at interactions and this for young adults. There is, and there's a growing research literature on this. So this is not just me, but this is our particular sports betting population. Of the entire sample, those who sports bet, 38% also reported using alcohol and marijuana at the same time. And if you move that down to just the sample that was the more frequent cannabis users, that increased to 75% of the sample reports that they at least once during the year engaged in alcohol use and cannabis use. I'm hoping that we'll be able to untangle the relationship. My hypothesis is that, of course, that they start smoking, they then sports gamble, and then maybe either as a celebratory way or sometimes as a oh my God, I've lost all this money, as a way to maybe cope with losses. You could also see that maybe they were drinking alcohol. There are lots of different hypotheses of why this behavior might exist, but there is a relationship again between alcohol use and marijuana. And as most people who are people who do this research, what we tell people is that when you're mixing these kinds of chemicals together, 1 and 1 does not equal 2, right? There's potentiation. So if you're mixing cannabis use, a hypnotic substance, along with the depressant, you may get more of the depressant effect. So we try to remind people that this is another area that if you're assessing students on, being aware of this particular risk behavior, because there's a lot of research that shows that individuals who engage in such behavior have higher consequences related to both their alcohol use and cannabis product use. So something to be aware of even within our sports gambling population. So that is the study that I am working on and the paper that I'm currently working on. I'm going to give you where does this fit in the larger outcome of all of the Hobbes research that's been done so far. Like I said, my colleagues are extremely productive, and we've had lots of papers that recently come out or currently under review or about to go out on these things. So I'm going to give you a synopsis real quick of where are we at with this particular study. As I've said, Arvin's research was really looking at mental health. And I'm just going to draw you from what we found in the study where you look at the relationships between those who sports bet and the mental health outcomes that we were interested in. Those included symptoms of depression, symptoms of anxiety, psychological distress, perceived stress, and loneliness. All of those things were actually increased among individuals when they sports bet and were more increased on days that they actually sports bet. We also found for those same individuals, we were asking well-being questions, because sometimes people tell us that, well, my sports betting helps me feel closer to my friends. And yet what we found is that people who actually filled out our surveys actually reported they were they had lower social functioning and less life satisfaction at time points when they actually reported negative sports betting consequences. So we do know that mental health is being affected by sports betting. And again, it could be mixed with their app use or social media use as well, since those things are now connected for this population. As I've said with my colleague Scott, who actually looked at the relationship between alcohol use, he found very similar patterns in alcohol use as I've just presented to you in cannabis use, that on days that people use alcohol, they had increased use of sports betting consequences, they bet more money, they increased the number of bets, they chased their losses more, and they again increased their frequency of days that they actually sports bet when alcohol was on board. And so there was this particular relationship. And this is really not surprising. I was discussing this last night in some other presentation with someone. The environments in which people go to sports bet could be a sports bar. It could be a casino or brick and mortar industry where people place bets. It could be a party in which they're using their app with all their friends and a fraternity or sorority, in which case those individuals might be drinking on top of gambling. Those two things are actually, and again, sporting events have lots of relationship between alcohol use and sporting events. So this relationship is not overly surprising, but actually adds to the body of work of the research literature, really showing that alcohol and sports betting are connected with one another. Then finally, we have two papers, one that's currently under review and a second, and both of them are psychologically phenomenon-based kind of research, led by our research study assistant. Joey, who's been working on this particular issue. So one of the first things I should tell you is that there has been a lot of research on what's called the social norms effects, and probably several people of this conference or on this webinar are aware of this. So I'm going to try to do my best to quickly give you an overview of social norms. There are two types of social norms. It's peer influencing we're talking about. Injunctive norms are where what you think other people think is acceptable. So if you think other people thinks it's acceptable to place bets on sports wagering, then that might influence my behavior. There's also what's called descriptive norms, which is if I'm a sports bettor, I actually think my peers probably engage in sports betting with higher amounts of wagers and they do it for longer. There's lots of ways in which the perceptions are that other people do this as much as me, if not more than me. And both of those, injunctive norms and descriptive norms, in our paper on sports betting have been found to be predictive of one's own behavior. So if you are a sports bettor, you tend to have higher perceptions that other people perceive it's acceptable to be engaged in this behavior, and you perceive that people do it more and with more money than you are doing. And that seems to actually mediate the relationship. So this is a phenomenon has been found in lots of other risk behaviors like alcohol use, cannabis use, actually just generic gambling. All of these things have been found. We have found the same thing with sports betting, those same social norms. And this can be very useful for prevention. We have found that sometimes correcting the misperception can change one's behavior. So knowing that this is the way sports betting work, this gives preventionists a tool or an edge to think about ways that they might work with college students around these issues. There's a newer model that's coming out, which is called the prototype willingness model that has been put forward as well. This is a dynamic relationship in which two pathways exist. One is a pathway of rationality. It's the planned behavior. It says to you, I plan to go sports betting. And believe it or not, if that's what your intentions are, you actually predict that you will sports bet. That's not surprising. The other piece that is more complicated is the willingness pathway. In the willingness pathway, what we are trying to do is examine what factors make you willing. So let's say you didn't plan a night of sports betting, but you show up to a party and lots of your friends are like betting on a game, or you're going to go to an event where you're going to watch a game and all your friends are like, let's get on the app and sports bet together. And while you had not planned to do so, you might actually engage in it because you are willing to do so. And so there are psychological factors that we are determining that actually predict more willingness to sports bet based on psychological phenomenon. That paper is about ready to go out the door, and we will hopefully find that we have found that those relationships exist as well. So there are two psychological supportive models that I think could be useful for those working in prevention and intervention, understanding the relationships between how these beliefs work and how they govern our own behavior. Now, finally, I'm going to pivot to the last part of this talk, which is really about what can we do about this? Well, one, I will make the argument that people are looking for help now. And maybe I have said this before, that the younger generation is looking for help more than I think the older generation, which might have seen themselves as very stoic and I don't have a problem, don't bother me. Younger people are turning to more online looks for help. So this is a study done by out of UC California and San Diego, I believe. And their particular work was looking at the level of which help-seeking behavior occurred online after sports books opened up. So once the country changed, this is a timeline across time, you will see in 2018 when the law changed, going forward, what the behavior of looking, so they were looking at Google search engine searches for help. And what you will find is as there continued to be more and more sports betting availability through apps, through sports betting within their state, you could see an increase of people searching for help online. So I do think that the population that you are working with, college students, are looking for this help. And so I think this is the part where awareness could be helpful to let them know that they could get services perhaps on campus or in their community for the help that they're looking for. I do think that there are people looking for this help. People are really suffering financial consequences, relationship issues, they're flunking out of school. There might be lots of reasons why this problem has become so problematic, and they're looking for how do I get this to stop? And so I do think that this is where pivots us to what can we do on college campuses. When I imagined this talk, so this is me always thinking about who my audience might be, I tried to imagine that there are probably two big groups in this particular talk today. I'm assuming that there are administrators, people who work on college campuses that are in the role of administrators. And this is my advice to those particular people. If I were asking, if this was my ask, what do I want of my administrators? These were the 5 things I could come up with. One is support your campus at expanding the screening programs that probably already exist in your health services or on your student surveys. So again, I will give you a reference. There is a quick and easy screen that's just 3 questions you could use. If you added those 3 questions to your general health screen or to your campus's screening programs to identify those who are having some sort of problem gambling and then refer them for further treatment or brief intervention or any of those things, I would encourage you to include these brief screens. The second thing I would think administration could do is that you could support. I know times are tough. I'm talking to an audience I am dealing with in my own administration about how difficult state budgets are right now. And I know my ass is going to probably sound ludicrous given what we are facing as a nation, but I'm still going to make them anyway. That is to increase the funding you would give to your faculty and staff to receive additional training in the area of gambling or sports betting within your existing programs. So people who are already your professionals who do this work, if you could figure out a way to help them get additional training to deal with problem gambling and sports betting, because most of those individuals who might be trained in substance use, there's a lot of overlap, but there is some uniqueness that is related to gambling and sports betting. And many of those professionals feel like they need some extra training before they can actually talk to students about this. And there is that training available, and I'm going to tell you where to get it. But I would hope that as administrators, you would think about increasing funding or flexing funding to help bring in speakers or to send them to places they could go. The other thing I think about as administration is to be very thoughtful about your college athletes. So college gambling is a real thing, and I think of it 2 ways. One, I did not present this today, but there is research evidence that college athletes actually suffer from more problematic gambling behavior themselves. And therefore, helping college student athletes address these issues, you should definitely have this as part of a curriculum or prevention program on your campuses for your college athletes. And then the other piece that I'm not sure people are completely aware of is how college student athletes are being bullied online when they actually play a game and something happens that they had to respond. Like if they missed if they missed the kick, if they missed the free throw thought, there are lots of times where sports bettors will harass their student athletes online through social media. And so I do think we need to be thoughtful about ways to protect our student athlete populations from this kind of bullying or activity. And again, since this is currently really an unregulated area, we need to think about ways that we can try to protect our students who might be experiencing outright bullying or badgering or any kind of harassment due to their play of college athletes and sports bettors. The other thing I will ask is how you can protect or how you can promote student programming to address, like having maybe Gamblers Anonymous, which is a free organization that could meet on campus. So I don't know what campus rules or regulations are, but there are self-help groups that young people normally don't feel too connected to because it's not part of their campus. But if you could figure out a way to bring them on campus, they might also be another source of helping individuals. And then finally, I'm going to make an argument that that there, in lots of states, there are already existing what we call state program problem gambling councils who will help with trainings and information and awareness. And so my hope is that you will reach out or look for a state council that's in your state already and see if there's a way to help make networking or connections so that there can be a synergy between those two. Those are my ideas for administrators. I would love to talk to any other administrators about ideas or recommendations they might think about as a thing to talk about today. My other is to the community who might be here today, who are themselves some sort of health provider. It could be someone doing prevention work, intervention work, could be a faculty, could be a staff member who talks to students. I think these are the things that I might suggest to you as things you might think about or consider. One would be additional training to become a problem gambling counselor. There is certification. So if you really are someone like me who likes to have lots of letters behind their name, you could go back and get certification to become a problem gambling counselor. And many of those states will then certify you in lots of different training that's available through your state council. So I would say, again, to look that up. The other is if, let's say you don't want to be a gambling counselor, but you just want to learn some more things. There are lots of now state, regional, and national conferences that are available for you to go at least to a single conference and get some more information and ideas and network with some people. And I will say college students are, and college populations are really prevalent in most of these. So there's actually normally breakout sessions specifically for this particular population. And if there's not, please create your own and ask yourself to go to that conference and talk about your experiences that way. So there's that. The other is, again, you too can advocate for expanding screening within your own healthcare systems. So please see if you can find the gambling screens, brief gambling screens that you might be able to use in your health centers or clinics. And then finally, I'm going to just make an appeal as a human being. This is not your role per se, but like I said, there are lots of local problem gambling councils that are normally nonprofits. I am biased because I am currently a president of one, and I lend my expertise from my knowledge of clinical psychology and other research advances to my state council to help them govern as being on their board of directors and governing the kinds of actions that they do to help people. So I will tell you, there might be ways for you to get involved or for you to think about getting involved in these kinds of issues if any of this spoke to you today. So as I said, this is from the National Council on Problem Gambling. There is a federal council that oversees all of the councils overall. They're based in Washington, D.C. They are, again, a nonprofit organization that also lobbies governments about different issues around gambling and regulations. There are lots of states. There are 35 states that currently have them. If you are currently online and there is not a state local council, you might think of starting one or getting in contact or contacting any state around you. And they will normally work. It's a nice organization where they will try to help you figure out a way, if there's not a council, to build a council perhaps. So this is a plea for that kind of information, if you were. Although, again, none of these people have paid me to say this. This is just me and my thinking about how you could get involved in this particular issue if it spoke to you. Because I will say, as a researcher for the last 20 years, this is a small group of people in the nation working on the issues of problem gambling. Every time I tell people what I do, everyone will tell me a horror story or a story about how someone in their family or a friend of theirs was affected by gambling negatively. I can remind people that about 80% of the population has no problems with gambling. So I am gambling neutral, but I will say that there's not a day goes by when I mention what I study that people tell me some story about someone affected. And that impacts my heart. And so if this is something that feels like a cause you're willing to take up, there are places looking for your help and your guidance, and your expertise would probably be very valuable to be used. As I said, there are a number of resources. Here are the links that are available. There is the National Council on Problem Gambling, which is a federal organization, nonprofit organization. ICRG is, again, a research arm that actually is an organization. They have research and conferences. They also run a collegegamblingorg.org kind of website where we are working on revamping and getting that to be the most up-to-date information for college students in lots of different ways, administrators, college students, providers, to all be able to use the single website. So I'm going to do a shout out to my friends at ICRG, who is also our funding agency. As I mentioned, that same organization is connected to the Division of Addiction at Cambridge Health Alliance and Harvard Medical School. They developed a very brief 3-question item screen that all of you could get access to if you want to look at. And again, if my nonprofit organization based in Washington, based in the other Washington, can be helpful to you, the Evergreen Council on Problem Gambling is also a website that has that. And we are also, we work beyond the state of Washington. So if we can help others throughout the country, we're happy to do so. So I will put that shout out to people. That is complete my presentation. I had hoped to actually end the viewing of slides and actually see everyone and hopefully start a conversation or answer questions that people may have.
Well,
Yeah.
thank you, Dr. Lostutter, for sharing of yourself and your expertise. As they share, now is the time for your questions to come in. It does look like we've had a couple of them come in, so we can go ahead and get started. But again, if you have any questions, please utilize the Q&A feature so we can keep track of them. So the first question we had come in, it says, I think it would be helpful to be able to ask about more financial support from administration if we could show treatment helping with students' retention. Do we have any research to support this claim?
We have some. So again, the National Council on Problem Gambling had some studies that they were looking at the amount of money that was targeted again at more of a state level, and not just college students though, but it was overall state, and the amount of treatment that was currently dedicated to it. And they have found that again, there's a lot more money, as you might expect, on drugs and alcohol compared to gambling. It's actually a very small fraction. But there is research to show that for every dollar that you spend on the treatment of problem gambling, you do actually get returns back that are higher than that $1 cost. So I would say that there's some research that's probably available on NCPG's website. I can't think of exactly, I know who the researchers were who started it, but I actually don't know where the study is itself. And if you flag that, I will try to find it for you if you need me to send it to you, Anthony, later. And I
Awesome.
don't
Thank
know
you.
if there's anything college specific. So to be honest with you, this is where I said gambling research is kind of difficult to get funded, and because it's difficult, there's no federal agency, right? So I'll just say there's no national institutes on gambling, and so I will say the funding of research is hard sometimes, but worthwhile. So again, I found this project to be very worthwhile, and thank the funding agencies who have sponsored us. And so if you have good ideas, you might think about seeking out your own funding from ICRG to ask those questions and get those answers.
Thank you. Another question, do you have any recommendations for different gambling screenings out there that are brief and can be used to expand screening in student health centers?
Yes, so the one I suggested was the one that Cambridge Health Alliance has put out, which only asks 3 questions. There is a variety of screeners, so if you go to any of the websites I listed, you will typically find all the different kinds of screens. The older one was called the Lie Bet. It was 2 questions, and so you can find very brief screens. There's even one like the Nods, which does the full criteria, which is just 10 questions. And 10 questions, yes, no, which again can predict people at risk or people having severe gambling problems. Again, it's currently framed as generic gambling, not sports betting, which is the other thing that sometimes changing the wording, because I will say there's always been a discussion of do we use the word wager, sports bet, things like that, and trying to find the right language that college students will respond to positively identify is another thing that you sometimes need to ask, because the language changes so quickly in this field.
Excellent. In regards to your recent research, were you able to ID the average amount of money lost in a month?
I do not have it off the top of my head. I will say the range went. So here's what was reported to us between 0 and 86,000 in our study. I remember that range because I saw 86,000. I was like, that's a lot of money. So I don't know exactly who reported 86,000, but that was in our study. On average, I I don't want to mislead you, so I don't have it off the top of my head. Sorry. That's a great question though. Things I should have been prepared for.
What, if any, prevention messaging have you found to be successful? Are there examples that you can share?
Um, We have used, so there are several papers that, again, generically look at gambling behavior, that look at, again, that theory of social norms. And we have used infographics that actually had, so we did a survey where people told us how much they gamble, how much they think other people gamble. And then we actually had the norm, how much people actually gambled. And using that, like one infographic of here's what you thought, here's what you gamble, here's what you thought others did. Normally it's higher, and here's the actual norm, which was lower. there was the ability to show that infographic, and that information alone in several studies that have been replicated a couple of times have shown at least at 3 month and 6 month, people changed to be more of the norm. So people reduce their gambling based on that informatics. I've also seen other social norms campaign that if you have the average, you would say things like, 57% of the campus doesn't gamble at all, or if they gamble, they only gamble with this amount of money. There are those. It's I will say, given sports betting is new, I will just say when I first started this was poker. So when I started in gambling research, what was the new element that all the college kids were raging about was poker playing, because it was on ESPN and they wanted to be like Moneymaker, which was a great last name for marketing people. The guy who won the first world championship, who was a college student, his last name was Moneymaker. Who didn't love that? But anyway, that phenomenon occurred, and I will say there was a blip for a long time. There was a lot of poker playing being played on campuses, and then it kind of over the time it kind of lost its buzz or excitement. Like anything, it kind of mellowed out. I do think that there was still poker playing happening on college campuses, and there are probably problematic college students playing poker, but the new buzz thing right now is sports betting. So I do think that we probably need to be thoughtful about looking at sports betting in particular, besides just general gambling messaging. So you might want to think about, is there social marketing we could do for sports betting? But I don't have those messages developed yet. Sorry, that was a very long answer to
No,
your
Ty,
very
that was
okay.
fantastic. Want to follow up? We had a couple pieces that fit into that question. So first, I want to tag on the end of your question about social norming, and norming. Could you expand a little bit more and be a little like more specific and targeted, like what has been successful or not successful
Yeah.
in social norms with problem gambling or sports betting?
So, social norms, I have not seen an actual study that has randomized people to compare to see if social norms wins out over not social norming or other messaging. But what I have seen again is personalized normative feedback done in a individual setting, and that presenting that norm and correcting that misperception. And we've done that both in person and we've done that online. So not actually a person available, just presenting the information to them and letting them read and interpret it for themselves has been shown to have an effect on reducing problem gambling among individuals.
Awesome.
Or
And then
large,
going back,
I've never seen anyone do a larger marketing campaign, although that would be fascinating. Like that would be fascinating to me.
yeah, absolutely. And going back into that, like messaging and campaigns, we know the traditional messaging is like the know your limits or keep it fun. How is that relevant or not relevant in the changes that we've seen in collegiate gambling and sports betting?
Yeah, I would say so. The people who are currently messaging as this, that is actually, I love that Logan knows two of the buzzwords. Those are the actual campaigns that we have run for problem gambling. Is know your limit and keep it fun. Those are the two. That's actually this year's logo for.
Oh, I'm adding in Javier Sanchez. Great question. So don't
Okay.
give credit to me. Give credit to Javier.
Okay, Javier, thank you for knowing the buzzwords. That's the campaign that we've been putting forth. We've decided to go with a more marketing campaign that seems friendly and open. I will say what we have learned that does not work, at least in the other areas of substance use, is the scare tactics, right? If you make it not fun, college students don't like hearing that. The population doesn't like hearing that. Matter of fact, this is the olden days of like the wrecked cars on college campuses. For a lot of people, they would be like, oh, that I feel bad for those people, but that would never be me. What we have found to be more engaging for people is when you can talk to them about the positive stuff of either recovery or reducing their behavior or keeping it fun. Is this idea of like, if it's not fun, maybe then you might seek out help. And so it is trying the idea of packaging or marketing to individuals the idea that there's risks here, but at the same time, you need to be aware of when the risk is moving into a problematic behavior. But the more appealable message that people will remember and actually relate to is the more open, more positive messaging, but also reminding people that there's awareness that there are people who have problems and where to get help. And so almost all of those taglines are caught with a 1-800 number which a 1-800 number now or text messaging. So again, most of this population will no longer call us. They will text us or online chat. So that's the way that most young people will access that information. So we have expanded it to be a 24/7 chat line, text messaging service where people are live and answering those kinds of messages when we get them. And we do see an increase, I will just say, in our own Washington State, our own nonprofit organization. We dovetailed a lot of those messages with the Super Bowl message. And again, we see spikes of people coming in and asking for help during those messages during sporting events. So I think it's important to have both people are there, people can still be told it's okay to gamble, and at the same time have a message to tell people, but if you're having problems or if this is no longer fun, here's where you at least start getting some help.
Awesome. I know we're over time, so Ty, I'm going to
Oh.
challenge you for to answer this next question in 30 seconds.
Okay.
And Anthony's going to kill me for going over. I apologize, but I want to get this question, Keith. I think it's a great question. Thank you for asking. Is data on marginalized students in gambling, and have we seen any impacts on gambling and student loans? If you can direct us on where to find that or anything, but it was a great question and I wanted to get to it.
It is. I'm going to completely acknowledge that there's not enough detailed data to actually find that particular answer, but it is an important one and one that we should be answering. So I will challenge us and all the researchers on this call to find that out.
Awesome. Thank you, Ty. Thanks, Anthony.
Yeah, thank you, Ty, so much again for sharing of yourself and your research and taking the time to answer the so many questions that we had come in. And again, apologies if we were unable to address your questions today. We do encourage everybody to connect with us at the center. As a reminder, today's session has been recorded and you can expect to see it uploaded to our website within 3 business days. Just a couple of upcoming events I would like to share with everybody. We kick off our Spring Learning Collaborative next week on the 26th, and it's from 2 to 3:30. Our next free webinar will be taking place on April 16th, and it's titled Connecting the Dots, Working with Fraternities and Sororities, and we'll be featuring our very own Logan Davis. And again, the 2025 national meeting that is taking place in person and virtual in October 20th through the 23rd. The call for proposals is now open, but will be closing at the end of this week, but we would love to see everybody's submission. Thank you again, everybody, for joining us, and I hope you have a great rest of your day. Take care, all.
Thanks, everyone.